Anyone who is in a cult does not realize that they're in a cult, because if they would realize, then obviously they would leave, or at least try to leave. A religious cult is defined as a group that adheres to a personal interpretation of the Bible rather than the core beliefs of Christianity and Christian traditions. There's many groups that fall into this category, including the Amish. And let's go through some characteristics of a cult. I will only be talking about the Amish because I was born and raised Amish, and this is what my videos are about. How to distinguish a cult. Number one, a cult typically has a charismatic leader who claims to have special knowledge or authority. Now, if you think about it, the Amish bishops, they have the final say-so of changing rules in the church as long as all the rest of the church members agree. And so the bishop doesn't have actually as much authority as people might think, but the Amish have a system. The system is called the Ordnung, and the Ordnung is their charismatic leader. It's their system because it controls their life. The Ordnung is the Amish highest authority, and it was developed when the Amish first began. Of course, when you ask an Amish person about their beliefs or about whatever it might be, they're not going to answer with the truth because in their mind, they are thinking that something else is the truth because that is what they are taught. The Amish are very extremely much brainwashed. But of course, when you're still Amish, you don't realize that. And you would say, no, we're not, if someone would bring that up. And if someone would tell an Amish person, you are not believing and living the way the Bible teaches, they would say, yes, we are. They would argue because that's what they are told in church, but they are completely not following it because they don't know what the Bible says. The things that they're told that the Bible says, actually, it doesn't say that. But because of the brainwashing, they believe the person who has said it instead of actually searching for themselves, because you're not supposed to question. When I was growing up in the Amish, I tried to question a few times when I was growing up about the things we do. Why does it have to be so specific? And it was not in a rebellious way. I just wanted to know. And there is a lot of times no answer besides the Ordnung. It's the Ordnung rules. And if you question the beliefs, then you are being rebellious in their mind. And you're told to stop being rebellious and to start being satisfied with what you have. Any group that does not allow you to question is very much a red flag. Also, a cult typically has a distorted view of reality told to their members about the outside. In the Amish, anyone and anything that is not Amish is called the outside. It's called worldly things. When I was growing up, we never, ever treated anyone who's not Amish the same way that we treat Amish people. It was night and day difference. The things we were told about the outside, anyone who's not Amish, they made it seem like it was all of the devil. In our community, we have Rumspringa for, usually it starts between the age 16 and 17 and ends in their lower 20s. A lot of times those people in Rumspringa end up drinking and maybe beyond that I'm not going to mention, and other stuff that's not good. And that is a typical view of how the outside world is. They think that anyone who's not Amish just goes and do whatever they want, drinking all the time and partying and whatever. That was a little bit of the view we had when I was growing up. A cult also has control over their members' lives, including their thoughts, their actions, and their finances. Control and manipulation is a huge tactic within cults, and the Amish especially. So it is so mind-blowing how many testimonies I have heard of people who have left the Amish and they were all told the exact same thing when they left and as they were growing up. Like, you're not allowed to question, and etc., etc. I could go on and on. About the same things that I was told, they were told the same thing as well, no matter if they came from a completely different Amish community. Same thing with the actions. It is crazy how all the Amish act exactly like one another. Of course, there is differences. We always say there's differences from one community to the next, but there is so many similarities. They all kind of act the same. Everyone who has a business, I have noticed, they all buy from the same exact companies. The stuff they say, the stuff they do, the way they go about doing the stuff that they do in their life, it's all very, very similar. Like the type of things that we would say is very much the same, because you learn as you're growing up that this and this is not acceptable. In fact, I was brainwashed enough to stay, but I had the freedom for a couple years to actually search for answers before I made a commitment to the Amish church for the rest of my life. And just that little space to question and get answers is what helped me to then realize that I need to leave and to realize the reality. When it comes to finances, I don't even know where to start, because there's so much financial stuff that is controlled by the Amish community. If you have the title of being Amish and a church member, you get a ton of financial benefits. Also, you are expected to tithe at church in a certain specific amount, and it helps just Amish members of the church only. Also, if a person gets excommunicated from the church, then that person is not allowed to exchange money with other members of the church. So anyone who was a member of the church and left the Amish, if anyone in the Amish exchanges money from them, let's say in a business or whatever, then they can actually, the member who is still Amish can actually get in trouble for exchanging money with the person who was a member and left the Amish, because they are excommunicated. Another characteristic of a cult is that the members of the cult are encouraged to isolate themselves from their friends and family in mainstream society. Anytime that someone leaves the Amish, then they are treated completely different, even if they left and their parents still talk to them, and they cannot have too much contact with their person that is a family member that has left. And the Amish are all about isolating themselves from mainstream society. The Amish Ordnung dictates what the Amish can and can't wear, what they can and can't do, what they can and can't have, or what they can own. And so, of course, they're not going to be anything like mainstream society. And it's not because of their choice, it's because they absolutely have to. You have to obey the Ordnung no matter what. Another characteristic of a cult is the emphasis on obedience. Members are expected to blindly obey the leader and follow the rules. This one is huge in the Amish. I was told over and over and over, every little aspect of my life growing up in the Amish, that you are not allowed to question. You just have to obey. I was taught that by my parents, and of course my parents were taught that by their parents, and the church preaches about that. Obedience. You have to just obey. When you obey the church and their rules and do what they say, then you get their approval. But if you do not obey, there is going to be consequences and you can get shunned. Members of the Amish church get shunned all the time for a short period of time. Shunning and excommunication are two different things. When a member of the church gets shunned, it can be like for a couple weeks or so, and then if everyone in the church agrees to take them back in and they confess their sins, then they will be accepted back in good standing with the church. One thing I learned the most just before I left the Amish is that Amish people are expected to blindly follow and they are not allowed to question. As I was growing up, I thought that when I would get baptized and make a commitment to join the Amish church for the rest of my life, that is when I would get my questions answered. But I was so wrong. You are expected to blindly follow what you are told. Something I have wondered about for a long time is, if the Amish are a cult, why are people so attracted to that cult? Why are people thinking that the Amish are just a cute little group that is all about a simple life and stuff? The Amish do not have a simple life, for one, but the reason and the answer to that question is, I finally figured out, The answer is that there is so much misinformation about the Amish that people think a completely false reality about the Amish. People think that the Amish have a choice to leave or to stay. Well, that couldn't be farther from the truth. They think that Rumspringa is a time to do that. Rumspringa is actually a dating opportunity. You are never supposed to leave the Amish. You are never allowed to leave. For generations and generations since the Amish began, people have been given false information about the Amish, so they believed a false reality and taught people about the Amish from a completely false resources. But now, just recently, there is more and more people coming from the inside of the Amish outside sharing their true experiences, and just because of that, more people have been realizing. Google has so much false information. A whole bunch of articles I've read about the Amish, it is so false, and people still believe it because they didn't really have any other information besides that about the Amish. So, how do you distinguish a cult from a healthy religious group? Number one, they embrace open dialogue and critical thinking. They encourage members to engage in thoughtful discussion and question the teachings. Like I just got done saying, the Amish do not allow questions, and they discourage any discussion about most things. Also, a healthy group respects individual agency, meaning members are free to leave the group without fear of retaliation or persecution. And like I just got done saying, the Amish are not allowed to leave. The definition of allow is to give someone permission to do something or the necessary opportunity to do something. The Amish are definitely not allowed to leave the Amish. When someone does leave the Amish, they usually get a lot of persecution. There is a lot of things that a person has to go through when they leave the Amish, or even in the process of leaving the Amish. I honestly don't think that I could have ever left the Amish if it wasn't for me living in my own house with that little freedom before I left. If I would have lived with my parents, I don't have a clue if I could have ever left. One of the core beliefs of the Amish is that if someone is born Amish, then you have to stay Amish, because they always say God is going to come looking for you in the Amish. And they think that when anyone leaves, that person is going to hell. That is the Amish beliefs, and that is why they always try to keep people from leaving. Another way to distinguish a healthy group is that they are open about their teachings and practices in their financial dealings. Why do you think there is so much misinformation about the Amish? Of course, it's because they're not open to speak about it. I have heard many times when my dad told people that are not Amish, like we're not having a conversation about more religious stuff, and when I heard him talk about some religious stuff and beliefs, then he would say something different than what they actually believed, and I was confused about that. And not just my dad, but other adults in my life. I worked in a lot of Amish businesses, so I was always around Amish people, interacting with non-Amish people, and I witnessed a lot of stuff where you would not talk about the conversations that you had with non-Amish people after they're out of your sight. Like, you just have your Amish talk when you're around Amish, and you know that when you're talking to a non-Amish person, you're supposed to just kind of go along with what they say, no matter if it's completely against your beliefs. So when someone is getting their information about the Amish from an Amish person, it is not actually accurate information usually. I know that sounds completely bizarre, but I was Amish myself. I had that mindset. And coming out of that, knowing what I know now, the reality, Amish don't base their beliefs on anything except for it's just the rules. If you start questioning their beliefs and traditions and stuff, it's all going to start crumbling down. That's why you're not allowed to question. That's why when I questioned and then found answers outside of anyone telling me, because no one would give me any real answers, that's why I was completely confused. It was so hard at first to realize that I was completely living in a different world. Another way to distinguish a healthy group is that they foster strong relationships with family, friends, and the broader community. Now, some people might think that the Amish have a lot of good community and family stuff, and that might be true to a certain extent, but this also includes like everybody, just all people as a whole, strong relationships. Well, I was taught that we are not to treat non-Amish people like we treat Amish people. I was taught that the relationships we have with them, I can't explain it into words how different it is from a person who is Amish, a relationship with a person who is Amish. And there is certain subjects that you can never bring up in the Amish. One of that is about their beliefs. If you start questioning too much about the Amish beliefs, then you risk that other Amish person tattling on you or telling you that you have to stop questioning because you are not being satisfied. They say that because that's what they're taught from growing up and from at church. Now, I would say that I had pretty strong relationships with some people in my life in the Amish, but there's just some stuff you don't talk about. And when it comes to the outside, people who are not Amish, then the relationships are completely different. You're not supposed to have a strong bond with that person. You're not supposed to, if you have too much interactions with non-Amish people, then you can actually get in trouble. If you think about a cult that has been found out and shut down in America, and I've just recently watched a movie like that, the members of that cult believe the truth to be whatever that they were brainwashed it to be. Anyone else who's trying to say anything different is going to be deceiving them. That's what I was taught growing up in the Amish. Anyone who's not Amish, they are going to deceive you if you let them. So yes, the Amish are absolutely a cult. Unfortunately, of course, I don't like to admit that because they're my people. I was one of them for 22 years of my life. And they absolutely fit into the description and the characteristics of a cult. Also, I have a reminder for everybody. Don't forget to be kind to Amish people around you, and don't forget to pray for them as well.